And their territory is this. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to claim there's an acceptable level of exposure, that there is an acceptable risk. Now, this must be understood as any risk equals sickness and death. Risk is not the odds of getting sick. Risk is the minimum incidence level of getting sick. So if they say the risk is 1 in 1,000 of dying, that means they're going to grab one person, take them out back, and shoot them. So you must not conflate this with the odds of the lottery. If the odds of the lottery at 1 in a million does not mean really that there's 1 in a million chance you're going to win the lottery. That's just some abstract mathematical number. But the risk in a risk assessment is how many people will be killed. It is in itself entirely deceptive because it's generally based on one exposure to one chemical. Here you have prolonged exposure to a blend of 50 chemicals plus their degradation products. So the risk is actually the incidence level. When you hear the word risk, translate that to incidence, right? You following me here? Look alive. So because I'm talking, I'm putting a lot of life force into this. So show me you're fucking with me.
We're fucking with you.
Great. Risk equals death. You got that? Risk equals, if the risk is 1 in a million, imagine a gun to your kid's head. Don't think of it as a scratch card. Think of it as a gun to your kid's head. Okay, next. The way they're going to hide, they're going to leverage that against what they're claiming is the background level. They always do this. This game is played the same way all the time wherever it's played. No matter where they do this, an office building or a dormitory or a community or another community or whatever. And in their press release, they said, we're going to do a background level study. We're going to do a background level study, and basically we're going to compare the levels in East Palestine, which are who the fuck knows what they are, versus the background level. And if the levels in East Palestine are a little higher than the background level, then we're going to say, oh well, then there's an elevated risk. But if they're claiming the background levels are higher somewhere else, then they're going to say, well, you should all come to East Palestine. It's a health spot. Hold on, I've got to turn off the phone. So they can even go so far as to claim that it's safer in East Palestine than it is other places. And so what they're doing is they're leveraging acceptable risk against the background level. Are you following me here? They're going to say that it's acceptable, the risk is acceptable, meaning the death rate is acceptable because in East Palestine it's here, and in Pittsburgh it's about the same. So you might as well live in East Palestine if you like the view and you like the sound of train tracks. Or you can live in Pittsburgh where the rent is higher. You might as well move to East Palestine. That's the argument they're going to make. And so we have to watch the two bouncing balls. Bouncing ball number one is their concept of acceptable risk. That has to be attacked immediately. There is no acceptable risk. There's no safe level of a carcinogen. There's no safe level of an endocrine disruptor. There's no safe level of something that causes genetic damage. So that can be attacked right on its face. Can't say there's an acceptable risk. Then the second thing they're going to do is they're going to say, well, here's levels in East Palestine. Here's levels some comparable place. Now, they immediately wrote themselves a pass in this news release, and they said they were going to conduct a background study of surrounding areas conducted after the chemical release. The entire background level in your entire region has been raised by this release. It ultimately, sooner or later, all ends up in the pre-existing background level to be measured the next time there's a problem. And so then the second place to attack is, which I did in my writing, I said, no, you can't say that you can't take your background levels after the release. The background study must be something conducted before the release or taken from a comparable place before a known point source concentrated release. Then the second place is, well, what exactly are they testing in East Palestine? I saw their map for community testing. In theory, it looks good. It looks like they've got about 150, 200 dots on that map, something like that. But the question is, where are those samples being taken? What is being sampled? Are there splits? And who is supervising the sampling? So there has to be citizen involvement on all of this. For example, they could be lifting up rocks and sampling dirt underneath rocks, which are going to have a lower level. The goal of this whole thing is going to be to show that the level is the same in East Palestine as it is where they claim everyone else. Therefore, the risk in East Palestine is acceptable. Therefore, we can kill you. Is anyone not following me? Raise your hand. We've got to get this. I cannot. We must never, ever, ever leave this issue. When push comes to shove, when it finally comes down to the decision to evacuate, when it finally comes down to what goes before the jury, when it finally comes down to your life, this is the crux of the issue. So is everyone following me here?
Yes.
Tell me if you have any space where you're not following my logic. You okay on this? Be honest. I'm not going to. You ask a question, I think you're smarter. The people who have a question and don't ask it, that's when I think you're a dumbass. So if you have a question, ask the question. Stop me and ask.
Well, I was just forced to stay in Palestine for the last 4 weeks with my children. I said every day they want me to play Russian roulette with my children's lives, and I'm not doing that.
That's right.
I'm not doing that.
But now it comes down to where the policy collision happens. Right. So again, there's two variables they're playing with. One is the concept of acceptable risk. That can be attacked on its face. No, we will not take any risk. I don't care, elevated or equal or whatever. And then number two, the way they're going to create the illusion of acceptable risk is by saying the levels are no worse in East Palestine than they are in Pittsburgh or somewhere else. Okay.
You do have a question, I think, Eric.
Okay, I don't know how to call hands. So somebody.
Oh, CC, I'll help you with the hands. CC, go
okay,
ahead.
so tell me the question, or get the questioner on the air.
CC, can you hear us? It says the mic doesn't work. Go ahead and type it in the chat. It says, I've noticed it's hard to find names of people who are doing the testing, making decisions in the news reports. Is this by design?
Well, it is, and it's very difficult to do dioxin testing. But the question ultimately comes down to what results the EPA presents as being acceptable. All of the alternative sampling needs to be used as ammunition later in the game. That needs to be brought in to discredit the EPA's attempts to create levels, right? So the citizen science comes in later, anything independent of the EPA. We need to keep that ready. We need to keep that saved ahead for chess moves later in the game. And I'm sorry to call this a game, but they view it as a game. And I know we are playing for keeps here, but so forgive me for using that word, but it is, they are going to game you. They are going to play you. They're going to play your ignorance, and they're going to play your belief that 1 in a million is an acceptable risk. And that's what they're going to say the risk is. I promise you, they're going to say, yeah, 1 in a million. Meh, there's only 5,000 people. Who cares? Chances are very low. This is not the lottery. This is not the lottery. The risks are not evenly distributed, and nor are the places that they're likely to sample. So if they turn over a rock to take all of their samples, which you have no way to know that. That's why no matter what levels they say exist, must be challenged. We must not accept anything that they say, except for the one fact, which is that they found them. Now we know from the soil from Indiana, which was tested on the way into the Heritage Hazardous Waste Landfill, that the levels are acceptable to be put into a solid waste dump. So notice the variable on the concept of acceptable. They're saying they're acceptable, but they were tested to see whether they were acceptable to dispose of as hazardous waste without incineration. Do we understand that? So people saying acceptable, that doesn't mean acceptable for your kids to play with their Tonka toys. in the mud, what it really means is it's acceptable at the hazardous waste landfill called Heritage in Indiana. Okay, so whenever you hear acceptable, the next question goes to acceptable to whom? So you have to, you don't need very many moves in this game, right? It's like, you know, it's like tennis. You got that one, you've got that one, you've got that one, right? So use not many, and the more you get diverted by their technical flow charts and calculations and the risk assessment and all this, you got to go right to acceptable risk to whom? Well, the risks, the benefits outweigh the risks. The benefits to whom versus the risks to whom. This is the central focus of this game. Then we will go over all the results. So, for example, the Indiana DEP, whatever they call it there, the environmental department, said that the stuff is acceptable for entry into a hazardous waste dump. Don't miss that. That's nuts. And no one reported that except for me. They said, well, it's acceptable at the EPA's acceptable levels. Acceptable for what? Disposal in a toxic waste landfill. So then comes, where's this soil from? Where was this excavation taken? The one thing we know from that Indiana report, absolutely, for sure, is they looked for 5 dioxins and 5 furans, and they found 5 dioxins and 5 furans. So now we can say, show me somewhere else randomly where you found all the furans and dioxins that you tested for. Okay, so are you getting, I don't want to go on too long here, but I want to make sure that we all understand how to play this. When they serve you and they say, boom, acceptable risk, what do you do when you hit back? You say acceptable to whom, acceptable for what? Then they're going to say, you're going to hear this term a lot. There's going to be meetings, assuming we're able to organize and focus and confront the EPA and confront public officials, because this game, by the way, has to be played on every single level of government, from the school board all the way right up to the Senate and the president, right? Because ultimately, Biden should be the one taking action, declaring a national disaster area, and ordering an evacuation. That is what happened at Love Canal. And I will tell you that what happened at Love Canal required Lois Gibbs. Many of you have met Steve Lester, right? Lois Gibbs' husband. I don't know if they are still husband and wife, but when Love Canal happened in 1978, Lois Gibbs was the housewife who organized the evacuation, and they hired a scientist named Steve Lester. Steve and Lois teamed up to create the Citizens Health Center for Health and Environmental Justice. So Lois and one other person from the Love Canal Homeowners Association invited the EPA to come to a meeting one night, one afternoon, and they organized the entire community to block them into the building, which was an extra house in the Love Canal neighborhood, and they wouldn't let them out. And Lois and her friend locked the door, and they called the White House, and they said, we have 2 of your EPA officials here. We want a disaster declared. And that's when President Carter declared a disaster area in Love Canal. That's what it took for Love Canal to be evacuated. And now we all agree 23,000 tons of chemical and nuclear waste buried beneath the schoolyard of 2 schools is not acceptable on any terms. Now it's obvious. Then it was not so obvious. And they made all the same arguments they make here, and they told the people they had the flu. That's what they told them. You have the flu. Okay, so can we get any discussion on this? Any thoughts? Can some people tell me what you heard me say and how you're going to work this? And then once I'm confident there's some people in the community who understand how to say this, I will yield the floor.
I'm paying attention and listening. I think I'm following what you're saying. I'm just kind of trying to absorb it all. I just wanted you to know that even though you can't see my face, I'm here, I'm listening. I'm a little green circle with a C.
Can you give it a shot? Can you give it a shot to explain what you heard me say about risk and background levels?
No,
There is no acceptable risk level for us. That they are saying that one in however many people is absolutely expendable and they do not care. The dioxin and furon levels that they have found here, they found 5 of each, and they're going to try to say, well, they're not that, and I've had this conversation with them already. It's not that bad, you know, they're everywhere. And we need to know, give us other places where all 5 of each of these are present already. And no, I don't want to live there because they weren't here to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And further, we don't know that the testing is honest. We don't know where these samples were actually taken. The same is going to be true for any samples taken subsequently. I forget who told me they saw the EPA. I think maybe it was Carly. Is Carly on the call? Who said that she went up and she busted on them about split samples, and you know,
I did that too.
Yeah, good. This
And I told
of,
them about CTEC's background.
what does that mean?
CTEC, the company that Norfolk and Southern hired to do the air quality testing, has already pled guilty to evidence tampering in the past.
Okay, great.
And that
So
none of us buy that.
Krista, we need the documents on that. So we need some court document on that. So let's make a note of that we're looking for the CTEC documents that confirm that the company was guilty or pleaded guilty to evidence.
I don't have a court document, but I have a New York Times article that said that they were fined and known to falsify air results during the BP oil spill. The same company that did all of our home testing, that they said that there were no detectable levels at any of the 500 homes in East Palestine that they went in and tested and told us our air was safe and we were fine to return back home.
Great, perfect. Once we have that New York Times article, we can locate the court documents that back it up. So
I had heard soil samples, so we might want to look for that too. Or it might have been one of their other contractors, but I thought it was CTEC with soil samples.
Okay,
So
yes.
CTEC is hiring another company to do soil samples called Arcadis, and they're doing split samples with the EPA.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt, but we have a section after the speakers for community discussion. That's going to be our longest section.
Okay, this is not community discussion.
So I
want to make sure that people, so sorry for interrupting. I need to understand that I've been part of the central concept on which your lives are going to hang. If you got to understand, if you never get to hear from me again, if I am disappeared, or if whatever happens, I want to leave you with one idea. And that is the idea they're going to leverage acceptable risk against the background level. They said it in their press release a week ago Thursday. They said it outright. They didn't say how they were going to do it, and you have to have played this game many times to understand that, or at least once well to understand that, and have it played against you. And the goal, they want to drag this out for years, and you don't have years to be soaking in this stuff. You don't know how bad the levels are in your homes. When I saw Zhuzh's photos of the paint peeling on the front door, almost a mile away from the tracks, that is absolutely outrageous. Paint peeling? So they do not know the real levels, but again, they're going to leverage acceptable risk against background. That all needs to be dismantled right in front of them quickly. And as Lois Gibbs said, at the beginning, she thought she could make her point in 15 minutes. She learned to make her point in 15 seconds. That's how good you've got to get. You've got to practice. You've got to come on my show and practice on me. You've got to practice with the neighbors. You've got to practice with your family. You've got to practice standing in the supermarket till you can say it quickly and efficiently and convincingly. Acceptable risk will be leveraged against the background levels. Meditate on that. Think about it. Go back and read their press release and see the scam they put right in their press release. This is how it's done now. They just come right out and say it, and then they do it. They will leverage acceptable risk against background levels. Both must be challenged. Okay, I'm going to pass the floor now. I've been on for 20 minutes. Any questions you have, I'll be nearby.
Thank you so much, Eric. You rock.
Thank you.
Kicking it back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Eric. Really appreciate you coming on. All the work that you've been doing those of you listening, those of you watching, visit Eric Coppolino's website. We're going to put it in the chat as well. It's going to be in the link to the video. Eric, really quickly, can you tell us what it is?
Planetwaves.org goes to my Substack. Planetwaves.fm goes to my radio program. .net goes to my astrology website. So you might or might not want that. I am analyzing it on that website. But planetwaves.org goes to my Substack, where all the resources are right on top. Planetwaves.fm is my radio program, which is at the moment devoted to this issue almost exclusively. The last 3 editions. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Eric. Really appreciate you. All right, we're going to kick it to Dr. Golomb. Are you on?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, everyone. This is Dr. Golomb. Dr. Golomb is a very storied and respected medical researcher. She operates out of University of California, San Diego. She was one of the premier researchers for the Gulf War illness. Dr. Golomb, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it over from here. What do you? I'm not sure where you want to go if you have any questions.
Okay, so like lots of people in the country, I've been troubled to sort of see the people of East Palestine be apparently forgotten, and it tends to be issues where people have been adversely affected by exposures out of their control and have been kind of dismissed by the medical and scientific communities that those tend to be the areas that we are interested in. And like, how can we help? Well, the way we can be of help, which isn't your most urgent help, but the way we can be of help is to try to assist in doing surveys to collect information on exposures, health symptoms earlier, and track the relationship to outcomes over time in order to identify what things show an increased risk. And you heard from the previous speaker information about, background risk and rates may not look that much elevated and who may care. We have a lot of experience looking at exposures and identifying what is called effect modification. Everybody is not affected equally by exposures. There will be some subgroups, even if an overall background risk is not exceeded, there will be some subgroups that may have radically increased risk. As an example, for one of the exposures that we study, the overall rate of a particular serious problem is 1 in 22,000, but in a specific subgroup that is not that rare or unimportant, the rate is 1 in 10. So the rates can be very, very different in different subgroups, and looking just at an overall rate can mask very important problems in subgroups of individuals. So I think what we can hopefully bring to the table is expertise in evaluating information in a fashion to bring out elevated risk that may happen in some subgroups and not others, and that may actually be very important. So what we're hoping to do is an initial survey that captures information on people's experiences of exposure. When did people who left East Palestine area return? What were their exposures to water, to air, to local food and soil? What initial symptoms and health conditions did they experience? And then longitudinally follow people up to evaluate what kinds of health problems emerged downstream. And we're very interested in having both people who don't experience symptoms and those who do, because that's what lets us learn what the sort of risk modifiers are that identify the individuals that end up having significant problems. So for right now, we're hoping that people who might be interested in participating, and it would in no way obligate you, reach out and give us your contact information. You can reach out at Golomb Research at health.ucsd.edu. Golomb is Golf, Oscar, Lima, Oscar, Mike, Bravo, Golomb, Golomb Research at health.ucsd.edu. And also, if there are any of you that want to help kind of review our initial survey to make sure that we're capturing the kinds of information about exposures, health experiences, et cetera, that you think need to be incorporated, we would welcome your input. We certainly want to have community partnership with the people that are most affected in this. I think that always produces the best quality research. And also, apropos of the previous speaker, there's a massive body of evidence in the medical literature on how conflict of interest distorts research outcomes. So having the entity that released the toxic substance be the party that is doing the assessment of exposure is clearly extraordinarily problematic. And I'm delighted to hear that there are other parties, hopefully, that will be doing independent assessments. And if Dr. Andrew Whelton has any interest in collaborating to, merge his findings on objective measurements of exposure with our work on health, we would be very happy to speak with him about that. So that's all I have to say.
Really quickly, Doctor, we have a question from Krista Graves.
Yes.
Well, that research and community involvement, I know a few of us have pre-existing and some of us rare conditions, and I know some of the exposure can worsen those, and I know that's a concern for me and a couple others.
Yep. And so right now already we've kind of planned the initial survey as a two-stage survey so that it's not an excessive burden at one point in time, with the initial survey getting demographic information, age, sex, et cetera, together with exposure information, health symptom and current condition information, and then a follow-up survey to come maybe a week or two after that would capture what we call risk modifiers, factors that can influence what the health manifestations are, which would include existing health conditions, medications, past exposures, et cetera, all of which can alter and in many cases magnify potential risk of problems emerging. So that's a very, very good point.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to get into too many questions because this is not the question section, but Eric Coppolino has a question.
Okay.
You're muted, Eric.
That was a very astute presentation, and I want to just give you a metaphor for that. Let's imagine there's a football game and a gunman fires into the crowd. The risk is not the same for everyone. If you're behind a concrete post, you're unlikely to get shot. If you're inside getting a beer or going to the bathroom, you're unlikely to get shot. If you're directly in the line of fire, you're more likely to get shot. And so the risks are distributed unevenly based on a wide diversity of factors ranging from body weight to previous exposures to whether someone smokes or not to how many COVID shots you had. And so it's very important to realize that they make it sound like the 1 in a million or 1 in 10,000, which is horseshit anyway, is evenly spread around the population. It is not. It is the vulnerable who go down first, and they must be protected first. But then half a step later, everyone else, which is why I'm calling for getting the pregnant and nursing women out, and then moving from there. That's it.
Yeah, I would agree with pregnant women not not remaining with potential exposure.
I also just wanted to say I dropped the link to the survey in the chat. So if you were looking for it, it's also pinned on the United for East Palestine Facebook page, but it's there.
This is not, our health survey has not yet undergone UCSD IRB approval. So our survey is not out yet, but yeah.
The survey is only used for rhetorical value right now. It's only used as leverage. We demand more study.
The community section is coming up. This is Dr. Golomb's time. Dr. Golomb, is there anything else that you would like to put out? I have a question actually regarding the survey you've already put out. I wonder if you have any information regarding how many people have already submitted.
Yeah, I think last I heard it was 25 as of yesterday that expressed interest. Yeah, this is just an interest survey so far. So the more people, the better. The larger the sample size, the better, especially for identifying subgroup effects. So, the more the community can be engaged to participate, the better quality of the data and the better the data will be accepted if it does show things, and the more likely it is to show things.
Thank you for that. Devin, you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a curiosity in terms of like the survey design. Are you looking at any kind of like comparable region as a control, or is that outside of the scope of what you're thinking of at the moment?
So that's a really good question. And what we're planning on doing is actually a continuous thing. So we're interested in exposure going successively farther out, and then also trying to adjust for things like plume modeling and so forth to accommodate people who might be somewhat further out but with higher exposure. So essentially, if you have, instead of just what's called a binary control, these people unexposed, these people exposed, you actually get much better, quote, statistical power, meaning you can see things with a smaller sample size if you're using continuous measures. So we're interested in using continuous measures. We also want to include people farther out from the exposure, which will presumably have, lower fractions of people affected as our mechanism of having a, quote, control group. But very good question.
Okay, Dr. Golomb, is there anything you would like to close out for? If you would also like to maybe plug your previous experience. I know I talked about your Gulf War experience.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Sure.
Yeah.
Our work has led to changes in military policy, both in the U.S. and in Israel, with them no longer issuing pyridostigmine bromide, a pill that was given to military personnel for use with nerve agent exposure. They now only would even hypothetically give it for one particular nerve agent, and that has never happened since the Gulf War. We've led to changes in understanding of the exposure relationships, the mechanisms of illness, and we also had a successful double-blind randomized placebo-controlled treatment trial that led to significant amelioration of the chronic health problems that Gulf War veterans experienced. And similar to many, many, many other environmental exposure type incidents early on, there were claims that they weren't really ill. If they had symptoms, it was all in their head, or it was compensation neurosis, or it was all due to stress. And of course, subsequent research showed all of that to be untrue. But that is, as you kind of heard, the typical experience with environmental exposure induced problems is there's a lot of effort toward denial, and that is a challenge to overcome. I will say that with Gulf War illness, we had a comparative advantage in that 700,000 individuals were deployed in that conflict from the U.S. So, even if only a much more modest subgroup elects to participate in research, it gives us, a better sample size to work from. So to be able to get quality information for East Palestine, the more, people can be motivated to participate, the better off we'll be.
Thank you, Doctor. That's really good to know. One more question from Krista Graves, then we're going to give it back to Dr. Golomb, and then we're going to move on.
You were talking about exposure, pre-exposure, etc. My dad is a Vietnam vet who was exposed to Agent Orange and never had his Agent Orange status. Does that play part in that?
Yes, actually, we have a general exposure survey, and for those who have served in the military, we have a separate military exposure survey, because people who have served in the military often have a different set of toxic exposures that we want to be sure to capture. And again, the only problem is that if you don't have a large enough sample size, you don't really have the ability to evaluate, those less common exposures as factors. But we still find ways to, creative ways to look at past chemical exposures in sort of bigger bins in order to be able to help capture that kind of information. Good question.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Golomb. Dr. Golomb, really want to just extend so much gratitude and appreciation for you coming on, for you having this conversation. I know you're super busy, and thank you for reaching out to get the interest to conduct this study. I think what you're doing is super important and needed, and really, really appreciate having you on. CC Koenig, if you could just make sure, I know you posted all the links in the chat. We're going to have all the links to Dr. Golomb, your website and the survey. We've put it out on our Facebook page. It's linked. It's in our pinned post in our group. Anybody who sees this, if you are in the area and you want to fill out the interest form, the link is also going to be in the link to the the description section of this video. Dr. Golomb, really quickly, would you just, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything you want to, words to say to sign out, or any information?
Other,
you'd like to
other
people
than
through?
that, I'm not alone in saying I know around the country there are people whose hearts are with you all in this incredible struggle that you're going through. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Okay, we're going to move on to Professor Andrew Whelton of Purdue University. Are you here with us, Professor?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you just move into explaining what your last few weeks have been like?
If I may, I share my screen.
Of
course.
course, if it lets you. It won't let me share mine.
Certain what you're going to see, but give me a second. Try this. Share. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we got it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So thank you for inviting me to talk with you all and share some of the work that we've been doing. I am based out of Purdue University in Indiana, and we made contact with Alex, Jenna, Aaron, and a number of other people from East Palestine area who asked a lot of great questions that government agencies weren't answering. And so we decided here at Purdue to put a team together to come in and kind of rapidly start getting answers to questions that officials were not answering. And just a little bit of background, I have 9 slides left. So just so you know, this is not a long presentation. My team basically goes into disasters. We either get called in by communities and families, or we get called in by government agencies and in some cases governors themselves. And we've responded to a number of different disasters around the country. Basically what we're looking for is what chemicals should we be looking for? Where did the chemicals go? And how do you return to your home's safe use? And then what, were or are the chemical exposures? And so that's generally what we're trying to do, and answer those questions, and that helps other people make decisions for their friends and family. So we put about 20 people together here at Purdue, and we send 2 teams into East Palestine. And Aaron, thank you again for showing us around and connecting us, as well as Jenna and Alex and everybody else. We were on site twice. We did creek water sampling, soil sampling, well sampling, and we spoke with a number of different homeowners. And when we went in, I'll just tell you straight up, I was shocked at how much contamination still remained in the creeks, because publicly officials had led everybody to believe that it all had washed downstream and diluted away. So we didn't plan on spending as much time testing in the creeks as we did, but we kind of came into a number of discoveries while we were there. We went to 13 different creek locations, and the yellow circles are where their contamination exists, and then the orange circles are background, like where contamination doesn't exist. And then you can see those arrows, that shows you how water flows from the big X at the top all the way down to the bottom, to the Ohio River. And so what we're looking for in the water was basic stuff like water pH and temperature, but also we're looking at VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and SVOCs, semi-volatile organic compounds, and PFAS we think we're going to be looking for as well with the samples that we have. Some ions and heavy metals. And basically we want to throw the kitchen sink at this because we were not satisfied with the effort that officials had done in providing information to those impacted transparently and thoroughly. Now we kind of created this diagram here, which kind of shows to us what was happening 3 weeks after the chemical spill and chemical fires. And this kind of sums it up, where we have homes that might receive well water, and there's groundwater under the ground that may be moving from the creeks towards the wells or vice versa. And then contractors have set up these big aeration units where they're blowing the pollution into the air. And so from an environmental engineering perspective, we want to know, what magnitudes are present in these different media, and then which ones pose the greatest risk, and then how does somebody mitigate that risk? How do you clean it up? How do you protect yourself from potential harm? So this is what officials should be doing, but it's not really clear to me that they've thought this all the way through yet. If you look at the officials' data posted online, the lab reports, we've scanned through many of them, and they've listed a whole bunch of different chemicals that they've detected in air and water and soil, and they look like this. And so if you're not a chemist or you hated chemistry, well, one of the things about being so involved in something now is that it sheds a different light on things. And so I'll tell you, I was not a fan of chemistry, an undergraduate, but I found out when I was responding to disasters, people were asking all these questions that I couldn't answer. So I need to learn it and help people understand. So a big primer, there's these straight change compounds called aliphatic, and then there's these ringed compounds called aromatics. And those are two different classes of compounds that we hunt for when we're doing testing. Now, you may have heard about the Texas A&M and Carnegie Mellon data. This slide here is from them. And they did a review of EPA's own air testing data. And you might have heard about it, talked about that there were certain chemicals in the air that if they stayed around at those levels, they could pose a long-term health risk. They didn't find any chemicals that pose an acute health risk. But of course, this is using EPA's own data at the time. Well, I'll tell you, this is new here today. So our review of the data that officials have been posting online, US EPA's outdoor air testing data, Ohio EPA's surface water data, Ohio EPA's municipal drinking water data, and then the county's private well water data. It turns out that these agencies are not actually testing for the same compounds consistently in their media. And so it's really hard to predict what the risk is going to be to different people at different stages if the laboratories are not testing for the same compounds. And so March 7th, we sent a letter to the US Senate, as well as the state of Ohio and US EPA, asking them to align their testing so that they can capture data that people can use to make decisions. And so there's also a number of issues where they're not testing for other compounds that either we have detected or should be present in air and water at some point. So what's next? Kind of bring it all together. Our issues that we found when we were there was that people were near the creeks, these heavily contaminated creeks in Sulphur Run and Leslie Run. Stay away from them. They are hazardous and they are not access controlled. When we were there, we recommended that fences be put up with setback distances and signs. Some of that's happened. Stay away from the aeration equipment where they're blowing the contaminated water into the air and creating plumes of chemicals, and these can then migrate. And so this is a problem as well. They're not access controlled, so we asked different agencies to do something about it. Cleanup worker safety has been jeopardized. So there have been workers working in these creeks and right around these creeks without respiratory protection. We saw one gentleman fall into a creek while he was working. They're not being protected. And so we notified OSHA about that, and OSHA then called me and then investigated. Agencies need to start consistent testing. So this is something that I think is going to help everybody have some peace of mind about what exactly the exposures were and what the risks are. You need to test the air, water, soil for the same chemicals. And if you're not, then you're missing out on the ability to predict what causes something from happening or what the exposure was. Some issues are Norfolk Southern is split sampling with the county health department going to people's houses, but they have not shared any of the split sampling water testing results. So it's unclear if they're actually testing for way more than the county's testing for, or if they're finding different results than the county. To date, we haven't found any data showing that drinking water wells are contaminated by the fires or chemical spill, but agency testing approaches are not consistent. And number two, we expect that this will take some time as the contamination moves through the groundwater if it's present. And then finally, we're going to continue to review results, and we'll have our results soon. So I'm happy to cede the floor to Alex, and thanks so much for
I think
listening.
Krista has a quick question for you, Andy.
Okay.
I do know of 2 personal wells off Leslie Run that have turned up with contaminants, not bacteria, it's contaminants.
On
I just
Leslie.
wanted to let you know because I don't know how quickly information is getting shared, and I just found out like 2 days ago.
So I had heard that the state is calling people, telling them that they have contaminated wells, but I'm not certain how that's happening because the county was the one that was sampling it.
I don't
So,
know. The one girl's a friend of mine. She said she'd share the paper soon. She doesn't use her phone a whole lot, but I just didn't know if that was useful to you.
It
I
is.
thought it didn't make sense to me because her well's 300 feet from Leslie Run. It seems like that's awfully quick traveling through the sediment. And I keep telling everyone the whole area is undermined. I don't know if it would travel faster through the mines into the aquifer. I don't know for sure that the areas impacted are undermined. I just know our whole region is. But that's it.
Well, I would love to be connected with that person to find out. One of the issues is, and we've seen this out in Paradise, California too. People were reading their lab reports as these chemicals, something D5, something D10, the deuterated compounds that are used as standards. And so we had people calling us in calling the state in California, thinking that they had these deuterated compounds in their water, but it was a standard. But I'd be happy to review anybody's information, and I've already done that in the last 24 hours.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
There's a question in the chat. I don't know if you could see it, but it's from Terrence. It says, did the controlled fire reduce of increase the contamination? Terrence, that has an extra word
I
in
think he's asking,
Yes,
did the
or,
controlled fire reduce or
did it reduce or increase?
it. Got it. Thank you.
So what happened in East Palestine was not a typical chemical spill. It's not often that when you spill chemicals into the environment, you light them on fire. So that's like an extraordinary situation here compared to the thousands of chemical spills that happen across the country. I would say that by lighting them on fire, they didn't just light one thing on fire. We saw when the rail cars derailed, the PVC resin was on fire. And when PVC burns, we know beyond a reasonable doubt that that creates some sort of dioxins, 270 nanograms per gram of PVC resin. So there's all sorts of other chemistry that's happening. And by burning the chemicals, they likely created a way more complex environment than would have been should they have allowed the chemicals as they were to exist as they were.
Okay, it looks like we have a bunch of questions, but I want to get to the comment section first. We're almost there. We're almost at the community discussion part where we're opening up for questions. I just want to quickly, Professor Whelton, I wonder if you could go into a little bit of what your on-the-ground experience was when you got to East Palestine and what your experience, your personal experience has been since then in terms of what anything you tell us about who you've been in contact, what your experiences with OSHA have been, etc.
So I will say that my experience going to East Palestine and seeing firsthand the issues that remained unaddressed was difficult, but nothing like what people that live in and around the area have been through. So I would say that because of what I saw and I witnessed, I engaged several different government agencies and people within those agencies and told them to get off their butts and do something, because what they're being fed at the levels that they're at wasn't actually what's happening on the ground. And this is federal agencies, state agencies, and we did see OSHA go and start investigating what was going on with some of the contractors that we saw fall into a creek and blowing aeration, blowing polluted water around. But it seems like it's on the down low in that they're not openly talking about it. They're trying to keep most of it contained in controlled messaging. So I would say that the best thing for communities to do is, one, organize, what you're doing, and two is maintain, compassion and vigilance for one another and the workers that are coming in that may have no knowledge about what they're being exposed to. The workers told us they don't know. We said, what is this? And they said, we don't know. I'm like, okay, that's a problem. So they have no respiratory protection. Some of them didn't have gloves on. And so that's what I find myself doing is compassion for people that are possibly jeopardizing their own health and safety without even knowing it.
All right, thank you, Professor. Really appreciate you. Okay, so where can people find more information from in terms of your websites, etc.?
I can post it in the chat. We have a website, www.plumbingsafety.org is a Purdue University website. And it's primarily where we post all of our disaster response efforts. And we have a page set up for, oh, there it is, East Palestine and the chemical spill and chemical fires.
Okay,
so
thank
I'll post a copy of this presentation tomorrow that I just showed you on the website.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to move to the community discussion. I hope that you, Professor Whelton, Dr. Golomb, and Eric, I hope you can all stay on for as long as possible to answer questions so that we can really try and make sure everybody is crystal clear and has all the information they need. Thank you so much for this presentation, Professor. Everyone watching, listening, I really hope that you can reach out to Professor Whelton, go to his website, check out his Twitter, at the Whelton Group on Twitter. Really just amazing work. I don't know if I know I cut off during my presentation, so I don't know if you saw the part where I showed the impact he seems to have had, and just really such appreciation for you, Professor. Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and move on.
Do you want to start with Gina? Gina had a question. Does that?
Yeah.
Gina,
you have a question?
I don't know if you're still here. Gina Vactor.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now we can.
Okay, great. I just had a question. I saw that this is for Dr. Whelton, you took a sample, like a control sample that was to the east. Was that surface water or groundwater that you were comparing to the other samples?
So to the east, we took surface water. It was in Darlington Township, southern part of it, I believe.
Okay, I was just wondering, I've seen some people thinking that like with the controlled burn that some contaminants can fall down and contaminate some surface waters. Now I know they're moving and everything, but did you find any contamination, or do you have any thoughts about how the controlled burn could have possibly contaminated surface waters to the east as it blew?
So that's a good question. I haven't seen any evidence yet, like logical evidence that shows the particulate emission rates or deposition. It makes sense that the black smoke deposited someplace. Whether or not that made it all the way over there or went somewhere else, I haven't seen the evidence yet. I'm hoping that people are working on that. We are testing for practically everything under the sun in the water samples that we have, and we don't have any data except what we told the state of Ohio and the U.S. Senate the other day, which is they're not testing for the things that we're finding, and they need to course correct.
Sure. Thank you.
Eric, you have a question?
Yeah, Andy, thank you. That's great. Two things. I think, well, all related to meteorology. I think we need a specialist on the meteorology and what happened with the inversion that night. I think it's seeming probable that a lot more stayed nearby than might otherwise have happened. And the second is, it is really seeming like this plume spread in some distinct ways that we don't understand yet. So there's going to be hotspots scattered around the region. And I'm wondering if you have any plans to, use meteorology to help find and other methods to help find the hotspots.
I can actually answer that partially. We actually have some really great people who have reached out to us with some great meteorological data. I don't know if you saw in my presentation that there was a preliminary sort of high split thing, but now we have data now that has plugged in data points such as where the wind was blowing and how the wind was moving. It's still ongoing, but we are actually making some really great progress in terms of actually getting the projections of where this dispersion occurred.
Before we go to the next question, Alex, did we want to introduce Devin at all?
Yes, thank you for inviting me, Devin. Okay, everyone, this is Devin Oship. She is a scientist, has been a scientist since she was in high school. She is a data entry and analysis genius of sorts. She has a TikTok, and she has put together an amazing team of volunteer scientists who have experience ranging from machine learning, which is the technical term for what we call artificial intelligence, and they formed a team with United for East Palestine that we're calling the mapping team, because they have presented the opportunity to create some really awesome maps and sort of scientific data point driven models for how this is moving. Devin, please say hi to the group.
Hey everybody. So like Alex said, my background is actually in neuroscience, so it's kind of a meandering path that led me to this. But basically I am just really interested in building a tool with the team that I'm working with to hopefully answer some of the questions for this specific instance. That would be the goal, but probably slightly more realistically, use this as an opportunity to make a really good tool that can help with future incidents of chemical spills, because there's a lot we want to do that takes time to develop. But we definitely are, I'm trying to think of the best, most concise way to explain everything, because I know there's varying levels of exposure to different scientific principles in the room. So I'm a neuroscientist, like I said. My dad is actually a mathematician. He works with like big data and huge algorithms. He writes software that actually helps the Air Force to maintain like logistical information and stocking the correct parts and all of that. And there's a lot of considerations in math and like a lot of regression analysis that goes into that. So when I did my thesis defense in refining tools for generating prognoses in multiple sclerosis, my dad was like, you did a great job for the tools you had in your lab, but why doesn't your field use the same math that we use for like airline things? And I was like, I don't know. That's a really good question. And we got talking about like different ways to actually apply big data to scientific questions and increase the analytical power. Anyway, so when this whole thing with East Palestine and the train derailment happened, and there was a little bit of discussion via my social media on like how people could start collecting data to get a picture for themselves on like what was going on. My dad actually came up, he called me and he's like, this is a really great opportunity to like test, like to start building the tools like we were talking about, and like use big math like is used in industry for like logistics in a more like classic scientific approach. So that I hope is not too long of an explanation for how like I just started talking to a lot of other scientists and people who do like our mapping specialists and chemists and people who work with the EPA, and just getting an idea of like verifying the problems that I noticed in my training area actually persist across scientific areas, which they do. And then talking with people to figure out like, okay, how can we tackle this? And how can we build a tool that we can actually like plug all this data into and build like really, really vast relational databases, and then get AI tools in to like run complicated analyses and build probabilistic models and tell us like what's happening, what's probably going to happen, how can we modify risk, etc. And I apologize if that was all over the place. Please like let me know if there's questions and if I can make any of that any clearer.
Thank you, Devin. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry, I was posting a couple Twitter links to some of the meteorological projections for particle distribution that we've seen. There's more that I can put up, but Devin, thank you. Is there anybody who has any questions for Devin specifically?
I think there was a link, any links for tracking the plume. I don't know if that was for Devin specifically.
Yeah, I put those up.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
You're good. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so Cody is the main mapping person. Like he's done a lot of the heavy lifting of like building the tools, and then myself and a lot of other people have done more like other components of work. Anyway, so Cody is constantly loading new maps into the tool. So he's loaded like wind information, water flow directionality information, like all sorts of things. So if you go into the tool, there's constantly new additions, and you can toggle through and look and see if like what you're interested is there. And then we are working as rapidly as we can on importing enough data and building the algorithms needed to do more like integrated analyses.
Awesome. Beth has a question. What are the first type of results we may see?
So from our tool, we really are interested at this point in just looking at integrating. So like from talking to the EPA, people from the EPA and like people from like Pennsylvania government and people involved in this in different areas, it seems like there's really good data coming in many different directions, but there's kind of like this issue that's been plaguing science across the board. Everything is so siloed and people really focus on like their specialty. And it's a little bit hard to get a lot of information on like looking at meteorological data and looking at like all the different elements of environmental testing and all the different elements of health testing kind of all together, and like being able to have one place where you can run all these really sensitive analyses. So the first point of order is like actually getting it together and like running like very basic correlations. But then obviously like the end goal would be able to do like, you know, what Dr. Whelton was talking about and what Dr. Golomb were talking about of like, you know, looking at really, really intricate risk modulations and really diving deep into the data. But like I said, at first, it would probably be like getting a lot of this data overlaid to be able to just generate really good maps of like, if you want to look at correlations between data that's typically held by like a health center and information is typically held by like meteorological researchers, that you can kind of overlay those. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. It makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to everyone else. Julie has a question. Julie Gladney, BS, LPN, IBCLC.
Hi there. So my question is kind of related to other questions that have been brought up here recently. I would suggest a fire expert to talk about the explosion itself and how far that may have traveled. I'm the daughter of a Vietnam vet who was also a retired fireman, and he, you know, his general opinion is, yes, it traveled far. So having experts, I'm 133 miles away. We had illness right after the burn. So just to make that suggestion to the group. And then along the lines of what Devin was saying about using AI and big math and all of that, I recently read a paper about how they're coming up with ways to test blood for pollution, dioxins, chemicals like this in a similar way to map it and to start to trace the origins of that exposure. And so it seems like a really relevant topic. So I just wanted to kind of toss that out to the discussion.
Okay, awesome. Devin, there's a request for links to, I think, your link tree. We're also working on putting together a more other ways to access information, but right now, like Devin's link tree and the link tree you set up, I think is the best access model we have to the tool. Krista, you have a question?
Yeah, my question goes back to the water testing and the sampling, the control sampling and stuff. There, when I was watching the plume, it went directly east. So the way I would think, and I'm not an expert at all, that's why I'm asking the question. I would think that the water over there would have particulate of some sort, not as heavy as over here where the water was completely drained. So I have, my two questions are, there's a freshwater spring in Darlington Township that a lot of people use. They haul water for their homes that don't have, well, you know, that whatever reason. Is that an immediate concern that whatever fell out of the plume is going to soak into the soil and then into the spring water? And then the other question is, as floodwaters rise through the spring, you know, the water levels will rise up the Ohio River and into Pittsburgh when the Mississippi floods. When that kind of stuff happens with our creeks, is it's going to do the same thing and take the contaminants farther away?
So let me ask.
I don't know if I made sense.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. Let me answer the second one because that's going to be easier. So right now, when you see rain, you see a lot of mobilization of contaminants. So they said they contain the contamination, but they haven't. It's still going down into the Ohio River. It's diluting out, but it's still there, right? They just don't disappear. The molecules are still there. So with spring, more and more rain is going to happen. You're going to have more runoff. It's going to be going into the creeks and it's going to flood and get washed down river. So
it won't rise and flow back upstream in reverse like flooding can happen?
So you'll have the heavy runoff, let's say from Leslie Run, right? Because we know that's heavily contaminated. And then that goes down to the next creek, Bull Run, and that's contaminated. And in EPA, I think said 6 miles downstream is contaminated. So if that comes up and suspends material and that goes onto property, then yes, you will have contaminated water on that property. So when you get down to the Ohio River, it may be a situation where there is dilution to the degree that there may be contamination, but it may be at such slow amounts that you won't be able to detect it. But I would say for the people that live along Leslie Run, the people that live along Sulphur Run, and the people that live in Bull Run, if they have flooding where it comes up onto their property, then the contamination is coming out and going onto their property.
Okay, I don't think I made my question clear. So say there's a tributary coming out of Darlington that right now is clear, and it meets up with a contaminated tributary.
Mm-hmm.
When the floodwaters are rising, I'm losing words. Are the contaminants going to enter the non-contaminated creek with the rising floodwaters?
As they mix, they may, if you have two coming together, they may mix right here to some degree, but they wouldn't necessarily go all the way up because of the volume coming down. You wouldn't have it necessarily switch complete directions.
I didn't know if it would carry it upwards. I used to date a towboater, and he would freak when the Mississippi flooded because he knew it was going to raise the water levels all the way in Pittsburgh. So with that same thought in mind, I was like, okay, so my little understanding would be it could carry the contaminants. My family spends a lot of time in the local waterways. Mm-hmm. And by what you said, it sounds like the areas we know in Darlington are probably safe to go near, take the baby to play in.
I would say that the questions that have to be answered are the ones about where is the contamination and what is it, and has it been validated or invalidated, right? The way that typically disasters go is that officials like to assume things are fine and then they don't test for stuff.
Well, I was asking you based on you using the East, which would have been Darlington, for control samples. So that's
Yep.
why I thought it was a good question for you.
Yeah, and I think
Because I don't believe anything they say. There is no point talking to them.
what we're doing is we're primarily using that one location in Darlington and then another location to the west as control, where we know there wasn't extensive, heavy contamination. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, and the second question, or the other question about the plume depositing contaminants on the ground and soaking into the spring. I don't know if you saw the spring while you were in Darlington Township or not. Is that a realistic concern now, in the future, or?
So for sure, there would be deposition around the fire spill site. And then people, I think 1 or 3 miles away, contacted me and showed me images of stuff that came out of the air and deposited onto the property. So in Darlington at the spring, you would want your local municipality to do the testing for it. Whoever owns a spring, if it's a state agency, then they would do the testing for it. Because that's generally how I'm operating now, based on what I know in the area, is I'm demanding testing.
Okay. So you're
Just
not,
really quickly-
I just wasn't sure. Okay, thank you.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to see, I know Dr. Golomb, you're really busy. I just wanted to see if there's anybody who has any questions for Dr. Golomb specifically. I don't know what time you have to leave, but I just want to give the opportunity for those questions to be asked if they need to be.
Okay, thanks.
Eric, did you have a question or more to add on to Krista's?
Just to add on, it's important to remember we live in one ecosystem, and there are many different means of spread. They include weather events and a diversity of other things, including tracking. And so I think it's important to assume the worst until there is real data in place. And also I would add, this kind of event is completely unprecedented. This many chemicals in this much of a simultaneous release, absolutely uncontained. All of those chemicals are going to go somewhere. None of them have been called back or retrieved. And any benefit there may be from dilution is going to be reversed by bioaccumulation and biomagnification. And I'm very concerned about knowing the levels on both the farms and in the farm products, particularly of dioxins and furans.
I just want to add to that comment that when there are quote N unquote chemicals, there are 2 to the power N potential interactions that have not generally been tested for their toxicity. And that by the time you get to 10 chemicals, that's over 1,000 interactions that we don't know the effect of. And so that's one reason why we may not be able to say what the health effects of this event will be, but we can say that we cannot conclude that this event is safe for people, under the precautionary principle, certainly.
Dr. Golomb, could you restate that a little slower and a little bit more
sorry.
for a layperson?
So if you have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chemicals, and that is the number N, then 2 to the power N, meaning 2 times itself, N times, is the number of possible combinations that you have that would normally need to be tested to see what interaction effects there are. And we know from the Gulf War, for example, that there were insect studies done showing that combinations of chemicals had higher toxicity than the sum of the individual toxicities. They had synergistic toxicity. And really important mechanisms of toxicity that our lab is focused on are ones that tend to aggregate and compound adverse effects. There are ones that you've heard of, like free radical injury that antioxidants help to protect against, that tend to arise with almost every chemical. And that in turn can damage the so-called mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of cells. And that actually can even lead to a vicious cycle, because the main source of those free radicals are mitochondria, especially damaged mitochondria. So when you have multiple chemicals, it can lead to worse than just additive toxicity of the multiple chemicals.
Can you really quickly break down what a free radical is?
So, so a free radical is when, for example, normally oxygen in the body is, oxygen connected to oxygen called O2. But then if there is a quote singlet oxygen that's not coupled to another oxygen, or a triplet oxygen, which is called superoxide, that extra oxygen is highly quote reactive, meaning that it likes to bind to other things and damage them. An analogy that a lot of people give is rust, where rust is oxidized iron. The oxygen binds to the iron and damages it, and that is often given as an analogy to what happens with free radicals in the body when these extra oxygen or nitrogen molecules bind to chemicals and cause them to be damaging to the body. And in turn, this leads to a range of effects: impaired blood flow, increased autoimmunity.
What is autoimmunity?
So that means increased risk of autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes or multiple sclerosis or lupus or immune-mediated thyroid diseases or immune-mediated liver diseases or immune-mediated muscle diseases. Essentially, because partly the free radicals increase the risk of cells dying. It's a fancy term called apoptosis that is sort of called programmed cell death. When those cells die, that releases cell contents to the blood and makes them vulnerable to immune attack, and that helps to drive risk of autoimmune conditions. And that's why many different chemical exposures increase risk of, among many other kinds of conditions, autoimmune conditions.
What is an autoimmune condition?
Again, it's antibodies in the body attack the body.
Okay.
So type 1 diabetes, you may have attack on the pancreas. In certain, there's a condition that arises with statin cholesterol lowering drugs, but also with COVID and COVID vaccine, where the antibodies may attack the muscle. Again, thyroid, liver, there are many different places in the body that can be attacked. And then there are also these broader conditions like multiple sclerosis and lupus, where there can be multifocal attacks by the immune system on the body itself.
So,
but great question, and I'm sorry that I really need to be brought back down, to be reminded that these are concepts that people might not understand. And with free radicals, you may hear advertisements that, a certain cereal is rich in antioxidants. So antioxidants are the kinds of things that you get from, fruits and vegetables and nuts and certain supplements that help to fight this free radical injury, but they can never really completely fight it, because the time course of the chemical, production of the free radicals, once it gets to a certain location, is so rapid that the antioxidants often can't be at that location and can't quench those. So you can lower the risk of certain problems by the right kind of antioxidants. And I'll just say, this is not medical advice, but 3 antioxidants that probably have the most widespread evidence of protection against many different chemicals would be a good quality coenzyme Q10 and melatonin, which people think of as for sleep, but it's actually a really important antioxidant in the body. And a third one is N-acetylcysteine as a precursor to another important antioxidant in the body called glutathione. Especially with that last one, there are some people that have a certain genetic factor that may make them not tolerate that well. But having a diet, as or in some cases supplements that provide antioxidant support can help to lower the risk of toxicity of many different chemicals. And again, that's not medical advice. Speak with your medical practitioner.
One more question, doctor. I was just wondering if you could explain, when you say the chemicals would cause oxidation or cause oxidized free radicals, are you saying that like for instance, one molecule would cause the body to create free radicals, or what does that process look like?
That's a great question, and we don't always actually know all of the answer to that question. We just know empirically that with virtually every man-made chemical, free radicals are produced. Some of that actually is because of primary effects on the mitochondria, these energy powerhouses of cells by chemicals, and then when those are injured in the process of producing energy, extra of these free radicals are released. But really the main point is that empirically, meaning just by observation, we know that many different chemicals, no matter what their supposed mechanism of action is, so many different drugs that doctors give out with widely different mechanisms of action, since these are all chemicals also, produce much, and then some, much of their toxicity through these two mechanisms of oxidative stress, or free, which is sort of another word for free radical injury, and intertwined mitochondrial impairment. That's true whether it's damage from statin cholesterol lowering drugs, whether from organophosphate pesticides, or even nerve gases, like we saw in the military. Many different chemicals with widely differing mechanisms of action. HIV drugs, so many different chemicals, even though their supposed mechanism of effect on the body varies incredibly widely, much or most of their actual toxicity is mediated this way. And there's data for many of those that if you pre-treat with one of these, critical antioxidants, or treat shortly after exposure, that it will lessen the ultimate damage.
Okay, quick question. So can you repeat slowly those 3 antioxidants?
Yes.
And also, just to clarify, I just want to make sure that we're all clear.
Obviously, they were running away with it, and Evan was
Marcia,
like,
can you mute your mic?
I didn't know it was.
There we go. Oh, thank you. So just to,
Yes.
I want to be clear on what you're saying. So you're saying that the chemicals, first of all, can you just quickly repeat those 3 antioxidants slowly for everyone?
Right. And I have to say that I haven't, sorry about that, specifically looked up whether for these chemicals there is a literature, but for literally hundreds of chemicals for each of these widely different chemicals. The 3 are coenzyme Q10, also under the name ubiquinone or ubiquinol. Ubiquinone is the one we actually have reason to think may be a little bit better, even though a lot of people think it would be ubiquinol, but that's a different discussion. And then melatonin, again, which people think of as for sleep, but actually has these incredibly important antioxidant benefits. And then the third is something that sometimes goes by the name of NAC, or N-acetylcysteine, which is spelled C-Y-S as in Sam, T-E-I-N-E. And that is the precursor chemical for an important antioxidant called glutathione. The problem is that glutathione doesn't tend to make it into the body very successfully, so people give the precursor molecule. But again, do not take this as medical advice. Speak with your healthcare practitioner. But for each of them, there's scores of studies showing for environmental toxin X, for environmental toxin Y, for environmental toxin Z, Q, elemental P, that they confer protection and reduce toxicity.
Thank you, doctor. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I, at least, and hopefully illuminate for anyone else watching, just clearly what you were saying. So, and let me know if anything about this is incorrect. So what you're saying, I think, is that the chemicals that people, like the sort of chemical cocktail that people would be exposed to from an event like with the train derailment and the fire in East Palestine, would be they'd be impacted directly by whatever sort of specific chemical reactions those chemicals have in their body in terms of toxicity on themselves. But you're also saying there would be a secondary plume sort of inside the body of antioxidants, or sorry, of oxidation, oxidation that would cause a myriad of other potential health impacts that would be almost impossible to predict.
that could cause a myriad of possible impacts. And I should stipulate that my bad. I should have actually looked up the literature on these specific chemicals, to see what literature there is on these with respect to those outcomes. But for Legion chemicals, most that have ever been tested, these things confer partial protection, not complete protection, but partial protection.
And Professor Whelton, I'm wondering if it would be possible for there to be any communication between the chemicals that your group is testing for and Dr. Golomb's ability to use that insight to better create a sort of medical research model for how these will interplay with each other.
So I'm happy to talk with her and her team about the stuff we're doing.
Sure.
We've done that in the past as fact witnesses in cases and such. And one of the issues with this situation is they burned chemicals. So that creates a host of issues, of unknowns. And then, as I think somebody posted in the chat, what chemicals were actually listed, and I think you responded, Alex. We kind of don't know still. EPA has put information out there, a PDF file with a whole bunch of names of things but EPA doesn't stand behind that. They said that it's Norfolk Southern's, and then some of those, like petroleum lube oil. Well, oils contain thousands of individual chemicals. And then they lit them on fire and created all sorts of other things. So there's a chemical complexity here that is going to be difficult to connect to health impacts, but you can have an incident that causes a health impact and all this corroborating evidence that moves you in that direction. And so, yeah, I'm happy to talk with her and her team.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, do we have any other questions?
I posted like 3 questions in the chat that we might have scrolled past, so can you take a look at and make sure we get them answered? There's one from Corey, one from America, and yeah, actually there's 3.
Okay, Corey, any testing results on state line lake and surrounding bodies?
Aaron might have replied to that one in the chat and said, I know Dr. Whelton didn't go across PA, like into PA, right?
We went to one place in PA, and then we went, I think, to the gun club or something around there too.
You guys got really close to State Line Lake, but it was landlocked and we couldn't get into it legally.
Okay. What would we need to do to get data from Pennsylvania then?
What data?
I just during. Oh, sorry. Was interrupting somebody?
Go ahead.
So I got invited to this. It was a little bit odd. It was like a press conference, but for social media influencers, which is just a wild word. But anyway, that's something I asked the Pennsylvania government. There was somebody there from FEMA. There was somebody there from the Pennsylvania EPA. And they told me that some of the data will be publicly released, but some of it will not be. But it should all legally be available under Freedom of Information Act. So yeah, so my team is planning on giving it a delay to like let the data actually like be there so that we don't have to like file like request after request after request. But we're planning on requesting under Freedom of Information if that answers any part of that question.
I was just, in terms of what data, I was just mean like how do we find out what level of impact had been felt by people in Pennsylvania? Because I know this was right on the state line.
So I know that based on what they told me in that briefing, they're going and doing a lot of groundwater testing. They have like and forgive me if I use the incorrect terminology, but they said they had monitoring wells that are not wells that anyone is actually getting their drinking water off of, but they mirror like drinking water wells, and they're just for environmental testing. And they're doing a lot of monitoring with those specifically. And then they're going out and doing some like actual like stream, lake, like other like surface water testing as well. That's what they told me in that briefing.
Okay. What are the other questions that were asked? America, you said the burning likely created more complex and different chemical substances, but is anyone pushing for lab testing and analyses of the chemicals that were burned to document that?
So I would say the first thing that I always tell people when a disaster happens is go get the stuff that burned or was spilled or created the heaviest, most contaminated stuff. And I'm not aware that officials did that. In fact, that they dug up a lot of it and threw it in a big pile, threw it on trucks and all sorts of things to get it out of there as fast as possible. So, so that's going to be a problem. What I do know is that the Ohio Attorney General is probing an investigation. The Pennsylvania Attorney General is probing an investigation. And generally, when attorney generals or federal U.S. attorneys investigate, they go after that kind of stuff, and you never hear about it until they file charges. So it's unclear if that material is captured, but I would highly recommend, if anybody's involved, to go get that material and characterize the heck out of it.
The first 3 nights, that's what they did. There was just nonstop trucks just flying through town, getting rid of the evidence. And I said that from day one.
Okay, Eric has a question.
Yeah, I've been clamoring, Andy, for bulk soot sample from the burn pit since the minute I heard this was going on. But also, we're going to have pretty undisturbed crime scenes on the rooftops and the surrounding areas, and I think that wipe samples, a term we've seen it come up once in passing, but nobody's doing hexane wipes, and I think they've really got to go where the grease is, and if it's not a hexane wipe. So we should have pretty good composite samples of what was there on the rooftops immediately surrounding, where there's not going to be people walking and where the water will not dilute it. So I think those are crucial places to be checking. Also, unknown peaks, the synergistic effects. The other professor was talking about. Well, when you magnify 50 times 50 plus combustion products, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of unknown peaks. Even a simple surgical mask, when tested, created hundreds of unknown peaks. They don't even know what's in a surgical mask, and they're manufactured. So they need to be checking for unknown peaks when they do these analyses, in my opinion.
So there is some data where they are doing what's called tentatively identified compounds. They're just doing screens. But as I showed, like the surface water samples are doing tentatively identified compound screens, but the drinking water samples are not, or the well samples. So you got all different agencies looking for different things, and there's no consistency. Yeah. So there's a clear lack of science leading the way here across the disaster, which is going to confound any ability for you or anybody to really link one thing to the next, except that it happened and this is what happened.
Yeah.
And in my experience going into these disasters, many times for government agencies, it's not deliberate. It's just they don't understand the bigger picture, like where this thing is going to go. And they just kind of muddle their way through it until it's over.
Yep. And
we have a
principle must be applied. We must assume the worst until they
Before we go to that next question, can we grab the one that says, is there anything still trapped in the clouds coming back down up from the soils and the water? And then we could grab Beth. I just posted that in the chat as well.
Okay. I also just wanted to quickly, because I wanted to introduce Aaron Bragg, because I know a lot of people here aren't familiar with him. Aaron was one of the first people on the ground asking about dioxins. He was the person who brought Dr. Whelton's team, both when he came personally and when his secondary team came the weekend after. He has intense knowledge of what's going on the ground. He has experience with chemicals and things. Aaron, if you would just quickly introduce yourself.
Real quick, most of the whole dioxin thing is all Mr. Eric Coppolino. When I found him going back several weeks ago, his first post, I found it that day. But Yeah, I have I live in New Waterford, Ohio, but I had a rental less than 500 feet away from this. Just based on my background, understanding products of combustion, I was scared from the first night. What was going on, what all was the particulate that was coming off, and just didn't believe all the stories like I just stated here a little bit ago. First 3 days, I mean, there were just nonstop, the 12-wheel trucks hauling stuff out of here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there goes all the evidence. So really, I can't thank everybody, all the experts that we have on here. All of that credit goes to like Alex, Jenna, Emily, that brought me into this organizing. So thanks for having me on.
Actually, credit goes to Mr. Coppolino as well. He was the person who introduced us and first told us to get in contact with you. So props to you, Eric. Really appreciate you on that. Question from, where was it? Corey.
A question.
Zuzha, yeah. Is anything still trapped in the clouds in any way, coming back down or up from the soils / water?
I would say the clouds, I'm not an expert on atmospheric science, but based on the currents, I would say probably not, because that's moved on to the east. I would say water, yes. Soils, yes. I've seen it firsthand. Stay out of the creeks, stay away from the creeks. And when it rains, you can smell odors coming out of the creeks, and that's because they're basically partitioning the pollutants into the air. So stay away from that area. The agency officials have not done any evaluation of what concentrations people are being exposed to in those areas. So they don't even know.
Okay, question. Beth, you have your hand raised? Beth.
If I did post Beth's question in the chat, and it was for Dr. Golomb.
Here I go. Okay, doctor, you mentioned that pregnant and breastfeeding women should leave the area. Are there any other groups that stand out as likely to be vulnerable?
Yes, the answer is yes, but I have to say that in sort of a public recorded thing, I'm not so excited about giving a list of groups because I'm a little concerned about issues of pushback. But in general, people who have more health problems are quite often at higher vulnerability. There have been studies of people with environmental exposures that find that people, as was mentioned, of lower body weight, because they have a higher ratio of the surface area of the body to the volume of the body. They are therefore, there's a higher fraction of the body that is exposed compared to the total volume of the tissue. And so that is a factor that can make women and children more vulnerable in some cases. In general,
I was thinking personally, asthmatics and people with respiratory problems would be particularly vulnerable.
For this particular exposure, I would agree that seems likely, that people who have respiratory conditions, but this is also just the kind of setting that can produce new onset of asthma in some individuals, or bronchitis, those kinds of problems, because there are airborne burnt particulates. I remember even when we had one of our big fires in San Diego, evacuating to a motel, and one of the other people there was a competitive bike rider who mentioned that she had once raced in smoke from a fire, and since then has had exercise-induced asthma that she never had before. That's just an anecdote, but you are correct that asthmatics may have more trouble because this is airborne, and includes combustion products. So yeah, I would 100% agree that is a group that may be at higher risk, but it depends on which kinds of problems we're talking about. But for airway problems, of course, people with asthma would be expected to be potentially more vulnerable. Very good question, though. In general, my kind of rule of thumb is if there is a major exposure, and the impact is unknown and you have the resources, get out. But that's a terrible, thing to say for people who, this is their home, their place, their whatever. But if there is a major health impact, then people would regret not having done that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Jen, am I missing any questions? Have people asked?
There's some questions about the first couple days and if that went to the Negley dump. But I'm not sure if anybody on here would know.
There's no way we would know. That dump is so shady down there as it is. They're already dumping asbestos in there. So would they not take that for a lot of money? Absolutely. They'll take it.
So I will say that because the governor did not declare a state of emergency, because that means that he did not waive disposal laws. And because it wasn't a federally declared emergency, that does not lift federal requirements for waste disposal. So heavily contaminated soils, that would be considered hazardous waste. And if this Negley dump is a solid waste landfill, then potentially they breached federal law. And then the state of Ohio, but even if Ohio doesn't act, the US EPA is responsible for enforcing primacy over the state of Ohio to the disposal of that waste. So you could probably find out where that went by asking questions. And if it turns out that nobody wants to talk to you, then it might be that there's something there.
It could have also went down to Heritage, right? WTI. We don't know.
Okay, so Devin, I see you making a face. Do you have a question?
No, I just have a resting concerned face, I think.
Okay, I saw your brows were doing this thing, so okay. So a question. I guess the thing that I would like to try and figure out is if we have a meeting of the minds here. We've got a lot of people with a lot of knowledge and expertise. What can we do to work out best next steps for how to A, get people evacuated, B, get the sort of sampling and data we need? I know Eric Coppolino, I know you mentioned that something about NAFTA wipes in the drain disposals and people's roofs. What can we do to get sort of a cohesive response on this?
We have to pressure everyone. We have to use all the information we have and put our best spokespeople right out front and pressure them. We have to pressure them by organizing journalists, local journalists. It's not enough that I'm the only one doing original work on this. As usual, I'm the in-house pet journalist on the issue, but you need to be getting other people on board and keep the pressure coming from the media. So really two things: you need very articulate citizen activists and then a lot of education of journalists to keep the heat on these people around the clock. Any other part of that question I didn't answer? Listen, as one journalist with really a couple of lunatic fringe people on my side, I managed to force a $50 million cleanup of some dormitories at SUNY New Paltz. And I was just some hippie guy with a news service living 3 blocks off the campus. And the students were not behind me. The parents were not behind me. The administration was not behind me. They were all fighting me, but I still managed to force a $50 million cleanup of those buildings. So, and it was almost entirely through media strategy.
Devin, raise your hand, raise. Hexane wipes. That's what I meant.
Yeah, as just a comment regarding media, just because so much of the current atmosphere is like with social media, there's a lot of discussion going on around like censorship and how to get around algorithms, which is something that I've been exploring because a lot of the things that I tend to talk about get suppressed by the algorithm and will get shadow banned. So if you're wanting to talk, if anyone is wanting to talk about these things over social media and really leverage those platforms, get in touch with me so we can because discussing hashtag strategies is actually really important. Oh,
I 100% agree with that. Our Twitter was shadow banned within the day that we started posting. Maybe we can also, I'm going to put the Slack link for anybody who wants to join the Slack into the chat so we can maybe get some organized responses on how to use social media to better get the word out on this. We actually have some success on social media, but we need to do a lot better. I see Megan's raising her hand. I know she's the Instagram. She has a lot of experience with Instagram as well. So, and I know you're going to have, but I think maybe we can table that conversation. I don't want to get into the weeds on the social media aspect on it here or right now, because this is more of a community discussion. And I want to utilize the experts we have here to the fullest capacity we can, since we have their time. In regards to what Mr. Coppolino just said, Professor Whelton, in terms of what data, the data that you've gathered, how could I want to use a question. I want to ask this in a way that as a scientist you would find satisfactory. How could the data that you have gathered and your team is gathering, what data would you say would have the optimal and maximal effect for putting pressure on people?
So we've already done that by just showing up and starting to validate things that people were saying were happening, and it became a government agency versus the people situation. And so we came in and we disrupted that. And we said, look, this is real, this is happening. And so then that kind of shifted the equilibrium a little bit, where was more information and other scientists are there, trying to study some things and understand what's going on. I think the data that we have, when we're sharing it, when we come out more so, we'll kind of plant the flag and help describe what happened, what's happening at the time we were there. And then, the community can use it for their benefit and hopefully then direct it at the government officials, who then will have to answer why they didn't do certain things. Like that slide that I showed you, it is illogical that testing's happening and you have 4 different environmental media with the same spill and everybody's looking for different things. So what is going on? The answer is that they're not coordinated. There's not a unified approach. They're all in the same room, but they don't have the same objectives. And so what we have to do is put that on the table, and then the community can decide if that's something that they're interested in pointing out and demanding that people change, because their taxpayer money, that's what we're seeing here. We are paying taxes, and they are using that money to do testing or not do testing. And so we have all a collective interest in doing it the right way, getting the data so that the people can better understand what happened and how they can best recover.
Okay. Okay, we had it set for 7:30. It's looking like maybe we might be able to close out early. Are there anyone in the community? Is there anyone else who has any questions, comments, concerns you feel that haven't been addressed that you feel need to be? Krista Figley, we've only had one team come in to do our air test, and they deemed it safe within 15-ish minutes. How do I go about getting other sampling done? Our house is one of the oldest houses in town, built in 1870 and within the mile radius. Can I have Professor Whelton, you have any insight on that one?
So there are no independent teams except for Texas A&M University and Carnegie Mellon that are conducting air testing. We did a little air testing at the creeks, but we're not funded at all. So we don't have the capacity to do anything. I would say that's important, that should be done. I also heard some anecdotal evidence from people that watch these air testing devices where we set up in the middle of the living room, and that has nothing to do with surfaces, wipe samples, as Eric mentioned. So there's issues with the testing that's being done, and I would encourage people to maybe seek their insurance companies to see if their insurance companies will pay for any testing or not. Sometimes insurance companies do after disasters.
So with our house being so old, I am very concerned. We have not taken the kids back, just because it's very porosy. We have sandstone deteriorating slab foundation in our basement. We have like catch basin type thing in our basement. Old wood siding, old wood windows. Like, we just cannot properly clean it, nor have we really received instructions on how to properly clean anything. We don't know what to keep, what to throw away. I'm still like kind of stuck in that scenario just because we haven't been in the house, even though they deemed it safe. I don't know if anybody could maybe give me any more definitive answers, I guess, on what to think about the situation, because if they come in and they say, yeah, everything's fine, I don't believe that.
I was just gonna, I posted in the chat, like, a couple things that I've seen, and I am no scientist by any means, is that get your air tested more than once with actual like wind happening, because a lot of times there's like still air and it's not picking up that like whatever is coming from like when a train passes or when the wind blows. So that can make your air samples different. The other piece is, how do you feel in the house? Like, if you go in, I know people have shared like they feel really ill when they're in the house. Like, that's but there is also an email address that I can share with you regarding getting your home cleaned, but it is provided by the EPA.
My thing is, with that it is, and it does collect water in there. I mean, it's an old house. It's seriously one of the oldest houses in town. What is the shelf life of the chemicals in my basement? Like, how I can't clean that gravel. I can't clean that slab stone. Like, I don't know if it'll ever be cleaned properly enough for me to feel safe in that.
I mean, I know Eric and Dr. Golomb would both tell you to not return to that house. So,
well, we haven't. And to answer your question about the symptoms, when I am in there and I'm trying to bag up stuff to throw away, because I'm still I mean, that's still our home. I'm popping in there, I'm getting our mail, I'm grabbing the stuff we need, whatever. I start experiencing symptoms, and then I leave. I get nauseous, I get the headache, I wear like my mask, and I'm not even sure. I mean, does that protect against these chemicals that we're dealing with? I mean, it's got to be better than not, right? But I get like this rash in here that's itchy, and then like on my neck, and I'm like itching, but there's no rash. So it's just weird. And I do experience different things while I'm in there. I do smell different smells at different times. Sometimes it seems better off, and then some days it's overwhelming. So I mean, we have not brought the kids back. I don't know. I feel like I need more of a validation from somebody that can come in there and actually give me these samples and say, this is not safe. And then boom, there it is. I have the paperwork. I have it. They say in the beginning when this happened, they told us to take samples. They said, wet wipe it, dry wipe it, bag it, store it. And we did all that. But now what do I do with it from there?
So
we've all been kind of like, sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you, Chris. I was just going to try to. So we have one of the biggest roadblocks we've been running into is just that we're still working on getting as many experts on it as possible. But one of the first things that Professor Whelton reached out to us about was in terms of the survey was we were trying to, one of the key reasons for that survey where we put the information out was to try and get funding for Professor Whelton to actually do those tests. And the problem is we're doing everything we can to try and get experts and people to run the tests, but right now there just is no money to get all of this test done. Some of these tests cost thousands of dollars, and we put out a fundraiser on Twitter, and we've raised about $700 so far. So, and I know that Professor Whelton did the same thing, and it's so we're doing what we can, but there's a funding issue, I think.
Do sites like GoFundMe reject you, or have you tried those?
No, Professor Whelton has a GoFundMe. We can put it up. I think it's raised about $1,300 right now.
Yeah. So I mean, there's an issue with this, right? So the optics of it. So we don't want to be taking money away from people that can use it, but we also can't come in necessarily any more than we already have, because I'm about $25,000 in the hole in doing more sampling. So there's a need that you have that needs to be addressed by somebody. So insurance companies could be one way if the insurance will do it. Sometimes insurance companies repair and then they sue the responsible party that caused it. So then they go and get it. Sometimes they don't. And I would say that officials need to come out and say what to do. So if EPA is going to do free testing or free cleaning, then how are they going to validate that the kids' baby toys the surfaces are clean? Like what are they removing? What do they think they're removing? What just saying things to do things has no relevance. That's Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection put out when you return to your home, this is what you should do. And they told everybody to wipe down their home with like bleach themselves. And so I think these questions, if you put them into some form where other people can point at them to say, these are the issues that people have still today, that allows other people to participate in that advocacy towards understanding what questions haven't been answered. Because I can tell you, talking to agencies that I typically go to for rapid response funding, they told me initially that it seems like everything's under control. There's really not a big issue. And that's because of the public narrative that was broadcast nationally. So that public narrative broadcast nationally hindered my ability to get in there to help figure out what's going on. And so I'll just leave it at that. If there's anything that we can do, we will help you in anybody else who asks.
Let me ask Dr. Whelton, wiping down with bleach sounds like it would be great for microorganisms, but that's not the principal problem here. What is about that as a solution to chemical exposure?
Yeah, that it has no relevance to what happened, but
Right.
That's what people in Pennsylvania were told to do that were near the spill site.
Yeah.
See, and they told us not to use bleach. They said to just wipe everything down with soapy water. But how am I supposed to clean every nook and cranny in my 1870 house? Like I don't know.
I would just like to. I just want to affirm one thing, like from Dr. Whelton. So Dr. Whelton was only there for 2 days.
Another thing that people might consider doing, it's not a perfect solution, but getting, some air filters with the carbon pre-filters. Carbon tends to bind lots of different chemicals. Many of them will have a HEPA pre-filter. Really, it's inadequate solution, but you have to change the carbon regularly if you've got a significantly contaminated location, but that's something that might at least modestly mitigate the exposure as well.
Okay, now what about when it rains and that gravel in my basement gets wet again? Is there still chemicals lying that have settled in that gravel? Need to be,
Krista, you're on the right
about?
track here, but if I may just interject for a moment. No matter how clean any one space gets, the entire community has been contaminated. And so everybody who goes into your house is going to track contamination. And no matter how clean you get your house, when you have a dry spell in the summer, the dust is going to be volatilized, carrying with it the organochlorines and other chemicals that have grafted to the dust. So that's part one. Part two is
kind of a moot point.
dioxin has been found. We do not need I think the scientists should keep working on mapping the plume, but from a public policy standpoint, the dioxin has been found and admitted by the government. We must run with that and not wait and not get distracted. They're admitting they've got 5 furans and 5 dioxins there. They scored 100% on those. Now the heat's got to go on. And we can't let them say, oh, that's okay, that level's okay. No, we're saying, no, any level means you've got some. Now we want to keep going, and we've got to deal with this.
Aaron,
So how we switch the focus from them talking about the acceptable levels because it went into and they're like, yeah, it was fine, it's fine. So now they're running with that narrative. So how do we switch it to make it more of a point like it is not acceptable either way you look at it?
Demanding evacuation. You have to demand evacuation. They should be buying everyone out like they bought out Love Canal and Times Beach.
100%.
I just home and
Aaron wanted to say something. I just wanted Aaron. I know Aaron was trying to talk. I just wanted to let you say have your.
Yep.
No, just real quick, like to affirm what Dr. Whelton said. So he was only there a couple days. He made a lot of public statements about when we were down sampling behind one area right downtown behind the creeks. He had his own photoionization detector, a PID. So with that being said, we were getting readings. Dr. Whelton kept saying, we got to get signage up. We got to get people away from these creeks. So the very next Thursday, that meeting, I jumped the EPA about what we had found, right? So, and he was trying to like throw me off. And I said, he goes, how do you know you had VOCs? I said, because I had a PID in my hand. He about shit his pants. So with that being said, the very next day, Razul, one of his grad students, goes, Aaron, hey, did you notice that those aerators were moved out of there? They had signs up and ropes. So they literally moved that equipment based on me, because of Dr. Whelton bringing that up to him. So we have to keep bringing in experts, whether we got to do, I don't know how we do the funding, that's all beyond me because I have no social media, but we have to keep bringing in experts to put the pressure on. The same thing that you're saying, Eric, is we have to keep demanding accountability of these folks, or they're just going to keep trying to run us over. That's all I got.
So I'm wondering, and this is like, I am not claiming to have a solution. I'm wondering if I might have the beginning of one for part of this problem. But I'm really wondering if there's any possibility, Dr. Whelton, if some of the people who volunteered to work with my team might be able to get in touch with you, because I have some engineers who've approached me and they have an idea for a way that they might be able to get some testing equipment into the area more cheaply. The principal concern is whether that would be worth doing due to reliability concerns.
Sure, I'm happy to talk with anybody who wants to find a way to bring to bear science and engineering to help people. So yeah, so give me a call. Anybody, because it's unconscionable that people 5 weeks after disaster still have a whole host of questions that have gone unanswered. And I've seen it in other disasters, but this can't happen. So I'm happy to help.
Yeah, I'll have my engineers write up a report on exactly what they're thinking and what their questions are, and then I'll shoot that over to your email, which I believe I have from Alex.
Mm-hmm. We also have the Slack. Anybody and everybody. The whole point of the Slack is to get everybody in the same position, everybody in the same place, so communication can happen easily. We have a Slack. I invite everybody to join the Slack. Devin's on the Slack. I'm on the Slack. Jenna's on the Slack. Everybody is invited to the Slack. The Slack link will take you there if you want to join. It's a place for very easy communication between everybody, so that everybody can be on the same page. I highly recommend it in terms of communication. Yes, someone asked if there was a protocol. It was posted, so that's good. It's 7:35 almost, so we only set it for 7:30. I don't want to go too much over time. I know there is a lot of people who still have questions. I know just to summarize, as far as I'm aware, the big key takeaways are: we need to keep the pressure on. We need to utilize the information that's already been published, available about the dioxins and the furans, and really push on that. We need to get experts in. We have a protocol, but I also want to say, as dire as the situation is, I just really want to express so much appreciation, and I'll also say fantastic job to Professor Whelton and Eric Coppolino and Aaron Bragg and Devin and Dr. Golomb and everyone else who has been working tirelessly, and Jenna and Emily, even though she's not here, and Krista and everyone else, all the work that has already been being done and is being, and I think that we are in the stages of really having, because this is a very far-reaching problem. We've been on Twitter, there's people who are reporting and documenting trees dying and lichen going sick all the way up in Canada because of these chemicals. We have data showing that this spread is very far. This is a gigantic problem. In terms of what happened, there are so many inconsistencies with the stories. Nobody can get their story straight on who gave the order to start the fire or why they set so many things on fire. We have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said in Congress during the House Oversight Committee that she felt this was a crime scene. There is a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of getting people evacuated first and foremost, and also looking into what even happened and was this even legal, and if not, who needs to go to prison. I think, but in terms of a team, I think we have a fantastic group of people who have come together to make some awesome things happen, and I just can't express enough gratitude for everyone for coming together on this.
Julie patiently had her hand up, so I just wanted to give that a moment before we ended.
Hi, I'll be real quick. I appreciate it. I reached out to a toxicologist, pharmacologist, also in epidemiology and environmental health, who's at the University at Buffalo. He's been studying dioxin since 1993. I posted a little blurb about me talking about it, but I have a document that I've shared to a couple significant people in here about his rundown regarding the specifics of dioxin testing. And his overall was really to put pressure on the CDC, the EPA, and particularly the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And we can all call the heck out of that agency to tell them about this emergency situation, to try to get some attention in that regard. He also included some links for, the whole basis for the blood testing with dioxins is that you need the very sensitive equipment that only a few labs in the world have. The CDC and the EPA are some of those agencies, but he listed private testing labs also. It's just expensive. But I'm wondering, kind of along the lines that Eric said, if some people can start to get tested, that information can then be used as ammunition to kind of blow this open wider. So I just wanted to add that. And I'm really shocked that there's no Ohio-based universities. So I am in Athens, and Ohio University is here. There's regional campuses. I'm going to go start making noise there next. I think we should also talk to Ohio State University. Like, we need more Ohio. So I appreciate the Purdue side from Indiana. It's amazing to me that you're showing up and our institutions are doing nothing. And it's really making me angry. So I'm trying to figure out who to send the anger to. So thank you.
Just to answer the question, we're going to post the recording. It'll probably, I'd imagine that Alex will put it on our YouTube page, ? But we'll also post it on our Facebook page and our Twitter. And then I think we can potentially email everybody who joined if you responded to the joined event. Maybe Alex and I can connect after to maybe send just a very clear thank you email with some of the resources that we talked about through the chat today, to just make sure everybody has those. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you to all of our experts with their wonderful wisdom. And we're going to do this again at some point. So stay tuned. The goal is to keep staying together. I know there's a lot of different things that draw us apart. This isn't political. This is about people and your children and your grandchildren. And like, that is what matters. So like, that's what we're in this fight for. So thanks everyone for being here.
One last comment. That's okay. Chiron Return is organizing information sharing and providing a central source of acquired knowledge on my Substack and various other outlets with people with knowledge in this group. Devin, Krista, there were a couple of others. Please write to me at efc@planetwaves.net to get on what I'm calling my press list. Again, efc@planetwaves.net, and introduce me. Also, people are willing to do work. I'm willing to issue press cards so you cannot be excluded from things that are press-only events. If you want a press card and you're willing to just report into me on a regular basis, again, write to me at efc@planetwaves.net. They're a professional credential from Pacifica Radio Network, and they should be 100% convincing. There, that's it. Happy to help any way we can. Stay in touch.
Awesome. Beth, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, there is house cleaning offered by the EPA. I don't think it's anywhere near good as evacuation for exactly the reason that the whole place is contaminated. But people have to go within what options they have. It's free. It's from the EPA, and I put the link in the chat.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any last final comments, questions, concerns before we close out the meeting?
Close it out, Alex.
Okay, hearing out. Thank you everyone so much. Appreciate you all for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Dr. Golomb. Thank you, Professor Whelton. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate you. Let's keep this fight going. Let's organize. Let's make sure that we're all talking to each other, and let's make this happen.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Signing out.
That's good.
Good night. Bye for now.
Bye.
Aaron.
Jenna, is the recording on your computer right now? Okay. Oh, I gotta stop recording.